maybe I should switch over to mobile. I'll do that in a second. I was thinking, since it's only going to be for a little while anyway, and informal, and because Bentley has been feeling left out, we could just have an informal discussion right now about scoring.
No, it's not that I feel left out. It's that we're not to that point yet. I don't think that would be a generative discussion. I appreciate.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of conversation we could have right now, though. That
it's a ways off.
Forwards the modeling. We could like the other option that we could discuss that I would propose would be just kind of trying to dive into some more detail on my example of the lockdown. That would be another kind of modeling oriented discussion of how we would model that.
Just one more thing to the scoring thing before, like the same was for me. Like I'm not that deep into the argumentation modeling, but I think it's important. And I'm more into the whole curation moderation thing. So that's why I started the other call. So maybe it would be appropriate to have a scoring call, and like not everybody has to join all the calls. Like people only join what they're interested in.
I would join them all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So would I.
Yeah, but that's fine.
And to that
but it's
point,
optional, yes.
I did meet with the Ysaurus guys to talk about integrating the reason score into, and y'all I think saw that chat, into Ysaurus. But then that's when we hit the challenge that they don't allow you to debate the relevance.
Yeah, exactly. Which is one of the main points. Is I'm still I'm imagining having reason score being one of the scoring options for the canonical debate. And this is where we get to the place of do certain models. Scoring requires certain types of modeling, and do certain types of models either totally change scoring or obviate the possibility of doing it, right?
It might be good for the scoring methods to write down kind of a minimum assumed feature set.
I have like some heuristics. I guess maybe it's in the white paper actually. Is the heuristics of what makes for a good scoring algorithm? Certain things that. But it's like you could score Ysaurus. You could.
Yeah,
it's just that it doesn't do what you would want it to do. So.
Right. Well, we did talk about actually for the just go ahead and taking whatever an average of people's votes and using that as the relevance. So yeah, you wouldn't be able to debate the relevance, but you could score it.
I think maybe we would want to turn it on its head a little bit. Is what is the minimum feature set for scoring, but rather what is scoring meant to support? Which features are meant to be enabled by scoring?
And I was thinking each scoring system might have a minimum set that might be overlapping. Some scoring systems may require, like a lot of them are voting, so you have to have a UI for voting, right?
Right.
So each one I think would have to have kind of a document saying these are so people could quickly get up to speed on it. But yeah, also maybe we should see if there's a common.
One thing I would very much suggest looking at is there's been tons of work in. If you're going to do scoring and voting, I think the probabilistic aspects are actually worth diving in. Look at Tetlock's work on forecasting. What's a good forecast, and allowing uncertainty, saying, I think there's, between 20 and 60% with that much uncertainty of this happening. I think there's between this and that of this happening. And what Tetlock is trying to say is it's possible to get voter scores. That is to know this one is making good forecasts, even taking into account that he's building uncertainty into the forecast. Like there are people.
But what is a forecast, right? So
prediction, right?
Tetlock defines that. That's the whole point of saying let's look at
forecasting what though? Forecasting what is going to happen in the future, or forecasting how people are going to vote, or
no. Forecasting what will happen in the future. It's about getting people to and there's the whole point of Tetlock is trying to build these forecasting markets which really reward good forecasting. And if you're going to have decisions, it's good to know who are the people who can tell what will happen, and who are good at predicting. Hello, guest.
That's Tim.
I'm the guest. Yeah.
Marc-Antoine, can you kind of find a link that you think is a good reference to that? There's a lot of stuff, and finding a quality one will take a long time.
There's Tetlock, and the other person I think is really important are the people who started Delphi and who make the distinction between scoring predictions and scoring desirability. Like, this is a likely occurrence and this is a desirable occurrence, and it's the cross of those that allows decision, right?
Yeah, and just a quick thought. So those are both kind of desirability and friction are all kind of mostly future, although of course you can predict about what you think happened in the past until you investigate it. But is there a nuance there between that and belief in factuality, or do you think that that all applies?
I think it all applies. The question is, even when interpreting the past, you're saying this happened because of that. You're giving a reason. You're imposing a narrative. You're basically imposing a causal model on past facts.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I just want to make sure that you felt that they were completely.
I absolutely think it's
completely
relevant.
analogous.
And again, there's been tremendous progress on saying, what's the confidence interval of this causal model versus that causal model given this set of observations and interventions and this and that. This is something that has been studied to death, and with huge recent progress that people who, like me, were trained in classical statistics and probabilities, we had no idea this progress existed. That Judea Pearl thing. So I'll send, I need to do something else now, but I'll put a few links in the,
whenever you have a chance, that'd be appreciated.
In the Hangout today, yes. So that would be my big, yep.
My take on that, I still need to be convinced about that, because my take on that is that probability falls into the realm of deciding truth. Whereas, scoring is about measuring agreement, right? Measuring belief or agreement or something. And so I don't, I see how somebody who makes predictions, better predictions, is somebody you're more likely to believe. But I don't think their probability models affect or blend into belief scores. I think it's
they do actually. That's what I'm trying to say. Like,
probably
the probability models allows you to believe that this is a likely outcome, and that hence that this is a good decision, right? Or that this is the reason why things happen the way they did, and that's a probabilistic model that says, yeah, the evidence.
Sorry, my mic was open. I was telling somebody I'm leaving.
That's what I thought.
Turn off my mic. Yeah.
So yeah, the beliefs and probabilities and decisions are actually very intertwined. That's exactly the point I was trying to make.
So yeah, so when you hear someone kind of state a claim that you disagree with, they're still kind of like, well, how much do you disagree with it, and what are the error bars on that? So even though it has nothing to do with the future or the past, well, it's the past, of course, but even if it's not, yeah, I think it definitely applies. Just the verbiage that they're using, the words that they use kind of imply a
this happened, even if we agree on that, which is more and more difficult.
Yeah, because Tim doesn't even want decision making in there, right? So
no, but
decision making in separate, we could call this separate domain or something.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't want the system to decide for you.
I'm perfectly fine with that distinction. There's a big market of decision support systems, and I'm a bit leery of that. And yes, I want humans to decide, but I certainly believe it's good if the system can help tell you, and that is, I understand it's out of your scope, and that's entirely legitimate, but actually, the evidence favors that causal model as opposed to that one. And that would be an external module, and I'm with you on that. But being able to plug into such a module, I think, is a bloody good thing.
Yeah, I do kind of have a feeling that I mean, it might be useful to kind of write down what our current, because I mean, like the reason score thing is very, very naive and a very simple use case and very small scope. So
yeah, so
I don't know that it overlap with a lot of.
So I'll write. I'll give references to at least the Delphi model and the Tetlock's books. I don't have articles on Tetlock, unfortunately. I've read his first book, the Hedgehog and Foxes one. That wasn't the title, but it's the one I remember. But I didn't read Super Forecasting yet. It's high on my pile. I
think I read that one.
But the first one I read does go deep into the probabilistic model. So I'm sure there's articles. I'll do a bit of search. But I've read the Turoff articles about the Delphi model are easy, they're clear, they're short. I totally will put that on. It's absolutely worth reading. I think it's a brilliant article.
Sorry, I went in the elevator. I lost you guys.
It's fine. It's fine.
So yeah, I'm not eager to start any conversations.
I think this is a good stopping point.
Yeah. And I now have 2 paying clients, so now I'm kind of like, oh, I got to actually do work.
Oh, nice, great to hear. Yeah. So I think you can still decide if you want to do a scoring call explicitly. It doesn't have to be weekly. It's just like one event and make a kickoff.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that. I think if I talk to the Source guys again about integrating, we'll post that and then anyone can join if they're available. Because we still might do that. I'm just not as eager about it because it doesn't take into account the relevance. So it's kind of like, well, is it worth my time then? Yeah, but yeah, I'll certainly take up that opportunity.
I mean, if nothing else, it might show clearly why relevance arguments are necessary. Because, I mean, and as I understand it from reason score, well, is it only relevance arguments that deal with weighting?
Technically, the truth argument, the less kind of true they are, the closer they get to undecided, the less weight they have as well. So both of them affect weight. And the relevance,
they get undecided by just adding, like, each time you add a new argument to either side, they even out, right?
If you have the same number of pros and cons at the same weight already beneath it, it'll be undecided.
Yeah, but you only get and you get the weight,
zero weight
also from truth. So as long as you keep a fully balanced tree, it's always going to be even, regardless of how relevant the arguments are, right?
Right. Yeah. And so you need relevance to say, well,
exactly.
These are both this pro and this con are both true, but this pro is more, has more relevance. So we need to change the score. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it might be worth the exercise. So if there's learning that can be had there, but why Soros guys would need to be aware of the possible, I mean, there's a serious change in motivation by applying reason score, right?
Yeah. It makes you have to model differently, unfortunately.
Well, I don't know about model differently. I mean, it changes the motivation of the people making the claims and providing the evidence.
Yeah.
Which, the idea is a positive motivator and finding every single possible argument out there.
Yeah.
But it also makes people want to try to game the system. And without relevance, it just might add a lot of garbage. it'll be too successful, because you can say things that are true but irrelevant, and people would have to come and argue that it's irrelevant as a truth argument.
Yeah,
then,
although in Y-source people would vote it down by relevance, and then we would take relevance.
Yeah, I guess you do it as a vote. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. They just don't have a way. I mean, they have a way to say why in comments, but not in a way that's impactful to the scoring. You can't debate about it. Yeah. And I've been wanting to put it to where you can actually like type in. That's a feature I've been wanting to add in the reason score, where you can type in the truth or the confidence and the relevance, just because sometimes you don't want to bother crafting all the sub arguments because no one's arguing about it. In order to have that effect on the score, I just haven't. So I'd have to build in that feature before I could then convert their data.
The question of relevance for me is I keep saying is a bit of a confusion, because there's a difference. If it's a causal link, we're speaking about weak or no causality impact. And if it's an epistemic link, it's about this is weak evidence, which is not the same. You could have weak evidence for a strong causality impact and vice versa. And I think these need to be distinguished.
So that is something that I don't know if I've written about it. Maybe it's in the white paper, but I've talked about it in different language. Relevance is overloading or boiling down multiple influences or multiple factors into one number.
Exactly.
And I talked about like whether or not which is better, and I tried to separate them. And what I found was, and maybe you're better at this, maybe you have the right answer, but I found it's very confusing for humans to decide which is which. It's already complicated to explain to the average person what is the difference between an argument on truth versus an argument on relevance, right? That's already a conversation. And then if you say, yeah, but by relevance, you can either mean what I call the impact or the importance versus the targeting of it, the compatibility with what you're arguing, which are two separate things.
And I think it's particularly confusing because relevance is a confused notion in essence. And that's why I'm saying distinguishing causality and evidence makes it much easier to have the conversation.
Yeah.
I think the problem with relevance is it mixes two things that are very different, and it becomes harder to reason precisely because it's.
I think there's lots of little areas like that, or little's maybe the wrong word, but I see other things like that even in how I'm calculating the truth, which may also be the difference between causality and
evidence.
It might also be clear to say in the model that reason score doesn't take into account causality anymore. It's assuming just that other side. But yeah, in real use, they're conflated.
And I think that's why we're bad at thinking about these things, precisely because we confuse those.
Well, yes. Although even if you're still increasing the concept count, so you can either have 2 confusing concepts or 4 clear concepts, and that's but the 4 clear concepts is definitely better, but it has a higher learning curve.
Oh, no question.
So the question then comes to putting more effort into the onboarding, which I think what I would like to do is, and that's what I'm going to do, is kind of run reason score. And then when we hit those things, we'll have really good real world examples to use when we break that out. But it's definitely going to need changing. This is definitely a V0. So I'd probably need to do some more reading on causality. I mean, I understand it, but.
Yeah, this is at the heart of like what we keep calling the kind of formality formal arguments, or like on a sliding scale. And by formal, we don't mean formal logic. We mean, breaking out the pieces into more distinct and discernible pieces. That's why Soros is already on one end of that scale, where they take what is easiest for humans to understand, which is just kind of pro cons, and then they throw in the kind of relevant scoring. I already think that you need to separate relevance arguments from truth arguments or truth claims, right? And the reason for that also being because of reusing and canonicality. And it's interesting that the more I learn, I see those edge cases where I start changing my mind and saying, no, we need to be even more complex and more detailed. You'll see the same thing with our audience, perhaps, where when you roll it out, it's too hard for people to grasp the concept of irrelevance, an argument against relevance versus truth. But as people start getting used to the concept, and I mean people as in the whole public, maybe, it's one of the goals is to educate people on argumentation. The more educated the average population becomes, then the more demand there will be for even more complex structures. So then we have this question of how far do we go on version 1? And we probably need to make it more complex further in the future. And let's just even have things with user testing, I guess.
Just I'm glad you're thinking along those lines, certainly. Just the thing, I'm wondering how much of if we separate relevance into causality and evidence, I wonder how much the truth would not fold into evidence. Because the relevance truth distinction might not hold.
I don't even actually understand yet causality versus evidence. I think so, what you're saying is, like, for example, here's a study that shows maybe this is happening would be considered evidence. Whereas, it's night because the sun is behind the earth or something with a.
Okay, let me try to first, before we speculate. If the question is, does A cause B? And if there's two aspects, is how strong is the effect? Like, does A cause B, does A impact B a bit, a lot? So that's the causality strength angle, or not at all, of course, 0 is a possibility. A doesn't.
If this is true, then the other thing has to be true.
Yeah, but if this happens, this is more likely to happen. How much more likely? How strongly? If this happens a bit, will the other happen a lot? Like, this is a kind of strength of impact.
Okay, right.
And truth of impact up to a point. And the other is believability. Is this happening at all? So it could be, and that's the truth angle, if you will. It could be highly believable that there's an impact, but we don't know how much. It could be, we could have weak evidence for a strong impact, or a weak evidence for any impact at all, or strong evidence of an impact, but we don't know the intensity. So these are kinds of this is the orthogonality I'm talking about. That's
interesting. I'll need to think about that or dive into that more, because that's interesting, because it sounds to me more like you're talking about two kinds of truth as opposed to, I have to break this down, but it's a sort of thing like.
I put the Turuf article in the Hangouts chat. It's a great introduction to this. It's easy to read. It's short. I totally encourage you to read it.
Is it in the? Can you put it in the Hangouts? Because I'm in.
That's where I put it. Yes, that's where I put it. I put it in the Hangouts chat.
Okay.
So an interesting thing about, or unless you want to.
Well, I wanted to toss back my typical example of the two aspects of relevance and see how that fits into the evidence versus causality paradigm or dichotomy or whatever. Where one kind, it's like I say, it's like kind of how good your aim is and how big the bullet is are the two different aspects of relevance. Where how good your aim is essentially how well the argument applies. So if it's an inference or something, you can have one thing, which is, you know, if we're taking a study, it's a study of one town in the country, and you're talking about the effect on the whole country. Then in that case, in this case, sometimes it's matching of context is the way you think. Well, the context of one thing only partially matches the context of the other thing. So it's an overlap that's not directly on. It can go into kind of inference.
So here, this is all about this is all about strength of evidence, but there's two axes. You're right. There's two axes to strength of evidence. We could have strong evidence in a very partial subcase, and how well does that generalize? We don't know. Or we could have weak evidence in the general case, but it's all about evidence. Fair enough. And that's another aspect of another decomposition.
But then there's like how impactful is this argument? And for this, I like to talk about the abortion argument, right? Which is you could have two arguments against abortion, which is abortion is yucky and abortion is murder, right? They both could be 100% true, but for most people, one is much more important than the other, right? So that's what I talk about impact.
Okay, and this is why Turoff decomposes, besides the strength of impact and believability of impact, he also decomposes truth and desirability. Like, what are the concepts? How strongly do you want to either have or avoid a certain consequence? And this is totally distinct from evidence, right? And some people will have different valuations. Like there's a decision is basically a matrix multiplication, right? You have actions you can take, possible impacts, that's a matrix, and that's supposing you knew everything, like supposing omniscience. The problem is there's uncertainty as well. But suppose there's no uncertainty, you have a kind of matrix saying this action will probabilistically lead to this impact or that impact and that impact, and that's a probabilistic. And then you have the valuation, which is more individual, like it's easier to align on belief than on values. Saying, I think this is good, I think this is bad, I think this is good, I think this is bad, among the possible impacts. And so you're doing a back propagation of here are the impacts I want and don't want. Here's the probability matrix of which action would yield to that. And hence you do that matrix multiplication to know which action is the most likely to yield to good impacts. That's a kind of very simplified model. I got that from Heath. I'll give you that quote if you want. But once you have this basic model of decomposing desirable and I don't think Turoff goes into the matrix decomposition, but it's the same idea. There's what you want and what you believe will happen, and you guide your actions based on how likely you think they are to yield the outcome you want and to avoid the outcomes you don't want. But those are distinct things. And there's more human variation normally. Like we're not exactly in normal times because the belief matrix is getting more and more disjoint. But it used to be that we had mostly aligned belief matrix, but divergent value matrix, or value vector to be accurate. Now the belief matrix is diverging, which is the post-truth reality, which is terrible. It's all the more hard to align on action. But still, the basic principle remains there's more alignment on belief matrix than on value matrix.
Right, but then, I mean, and a decision, depending on, you're talking about a decision between multiple possible solutions. applies to the single solution case where a solution is really a conclusion, right?
What action will I take that maximize the outcome for me? I'm being like within a purely utilitarian framework here.
Well, no, yeah, but a matrix is for that sort of problem solving. But if you just want to decide your outcome is true or false,
that's at the belief level. But the example you gave of abortion, the example you gave of abortion, that's at the value level. It's a distinct value. It's a distinct, like, is the
right. But that's what I'm saying is how do we model the relevance of that argument?
It's again, thinking of it in terms of relevance, I think, is a red herring. This is about the value of there's the fact that, you know, nobody denies that the human fetus will lead to a human. Some people are arguing about soul, which is, you know, that's a belief aspect, but nobody denies that we have a proto-thinking being. And the question is, what is the value of killing a proto-human being versus the value of potential negative impacts on the life of the women and family and society, blah, blah, blah. And those impacts are not even, sometimes they're not discussed, but I don't think they're being actively denied. It's just, it's a question about values. Is this an absolute value? Is this not an absolute value? As opposed to, but it's not at the causality level. It's not at the belief in consequences level. There's the belief in the soul, which is kind of, and they're speaking about what are the consequences of destroying a soul, where there's argument, yes, but it's not an observable, right?
Right, but so my whole question is, how do you model that argument and its connection or impact to the claim that abortion should be illegal? And because essentially what you're saying is it doesn't even match into the question of evidence versus causality.
No, it goes into belief and value. It goes into
something
value.
else, right? In other words,
but that can be modeled too.
Are there elements that we're missing to the model, or is it sufficient, as I'm proposing, that we just do a relevance score that captures all these aspects together into one score, and maybe its meaning, depending on the kind of argument, is different, so people understand that and it functions properly just by knowing that it's essentially a percent for the impact of that statement, right?
What I'm saying is separate the belief, the value score from the belief score, so that there's two scores, two separate scores. Again, quoting Turoff.
No, but belief score is the claim, the true false. Is abortion murder? That's down at the claim level. Abortion is murder or not? So that's already encapsulated in the truth of the claim, or the agreement with the claim.
Well, this is the problem is we get into definition games. Of course, it's removing a life. The question is, how is there a case where we are taking not only a life but a consciousness, and that is really no.
But then you're talking, okay, but now you're talking about general versus specific, because we could talk about abortion in third term healthy babies, right? What is it? Voluntary? No, what is it? Elective abortion of third term fetus.
Yeah. No, the question is, no, even pro-choice people don't say abortion is not taking a life. We argue on the question of murder. The question is does murder mean killing a conscious human, and then is the fetus conscious? I mean, that's
okay,
the kind.
Let me get down to the disambiguation, right? Where if your definition is murder of an individual human person, right?
Right.
You might get a lot of people saying no, it's not murder, and you'll get other people saying, fewer people saying yes. Whereas if you say murder is defined as stopping the life or the birth of anything that could survive on its own outside the womb, I mean, that's still true, right? And then but then you get to something that has consciousness, has a fully developed consciousness. Well, depending on where you split what kind of abortion and your definition of consciousness, you'll have, but that gets down to then true or false. But then when you go and apply each one of those variations against abortion should be illegal, then you get to how relevant that is, right? Because first there's the accuracy thing, which is if we're talking about first-term abortion and you try to apply an argument of third-term abortion, that is irrelevant, right? Because of the accuracy part I was talking about.
Yeah.
But then you get to second-term abortion, and half the people think it has a consciousness and half the people don't. And maybe it's accurate, but it's not true, or it is true based on your beliefs. You're still not talking relevance. And then you talk about, okay, the argument is you're stopping a potential human being, right? And now there you're really going to have relevance into it, because everybody agrees you're stopping a potential human being. But what is the impact of that truth compared to, for example, the harm it does to women and families and the economy and the society and so on? So there you're balancing things out, and that's where you get to the relevance argument, right? And so, part of my question is, do we need more than one kind of relevance score to encapsulate all that?
My answer is yes.
Okay, and so how would you break it down? I clearly see there's a difference between, quote unquote, accuracy and impact. I see how accuracy can somewhat be automated if you have all your disambiguations laid out and there's relationships between definitions. I don't know if then we need to include in the system every kind of inference scheme to calculate those things. But then there's still the part which is the impact, which may just be a personal decision. I don't know if the impact part needs to be broken out as well.
What I'm saying is, I think it should be pretty easy to decompose the different definitions of murder, right? Murdering consciousness, potential consciousness, soul, and yeah, there will be difference in belief. Like, when does consciousness develop in the fetus? There's a whole belief aspect to that. But I don't expect this is where most of the conversation will happen. The conversation will happen to what is absolute ethical barrier. Is absolute ethical barrier to killing at-term humans, killing conscious humans, potentially conscious humans, killing souls? I mean, what is something that you see as of very, very high value? And then you get into all kinds of, as you say, more or less viable, more or less, and then you get into the slippery slopes, into the humanity of people with different deficiency and eugenics, and we get into a whole other ethical quagmire. Thank you very much. But again, I mean, they can be. It is a matter of definitions of what is happening here, and where is your ethical boundary. And then there's meta arguments such as slippery slope. I mean, how is putting the boundary here instead of there may lead to getting the boundary there instead, further down. And I think those can be, there's a boundary anywhere, right? And
right, but I see all that being covered by the argumentation structures that we're already proposing.
And what I'm saying is it can be handled, I think, better by separating belief and, like, the belief is what is happening, and that's the as you said, up to a point, it's the better definitions, and some of that will be handled by belief, and saying, okay, where is your ethical barrier, which may be at a different place than mine? And this is what I call the value system, and distinguishing those, saying, this is what I think is an ethical no-no, as opposed to what you believe is an ethical no-no, because you'll put the boundary somewhere else. But we can agree on belief independently from agreeing on the ethical barrier, and distinguishing those, I think, is extremely important.
Let me just, thank you for all this. I kind of just realized that in like the reason score and in the scoring systems, my belief is that there's really only two things, but they are not relevance or truth when you're developing the score. So I'm struggling for words, and all of those, all the different, all the different causalities and stuff like that is important for people to understand and to explain and have in the system. But for my scoring model, it's just what is the score of that item and what is that weight of that item compared to the other things. Because I even found that relevance right now in my system, you choose the word relevance and it affects the weight. But there are some relevance things that anyways, so there's some times where they actually kind of belong. So I might abstract it out to where it's just the score that rolls up and the weight compared to the other stuff. And then that leaves us free to redefine terms and make multiple things.
I really recommend you all read Turoff, and we start the conversation from the vocabulary Turoff proposes, because it's a very good analysis, and it's simple. It's a short article. It's no big deal. We'll have a common vocabulary.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Thank you.
Are you sending the link in Slack?
It's already in the Hangout Slack, unless I made a mistake.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. There's also, which is less important, but the first one is really short, sweet.
I mean, the other important thing is it's unlikely that I'll be able to incorporate anything that we're talking about in Reason Score anytime soon. Resource constraints. I'm not actively developing, but it is actively going to be used by people. So, but that's also why it's why it's a curated model and not a crowdsourced model right now, just like because we don't have the complexity in the system to model that, but we could always write out in text an explanation inside the claims so that it kind of makes sense. So it's very, very naive, and it's just an experiment. So it's the short term, not the long term system. And the whole idea may not work. So let's see.
I think we have exhausted the topic for now.
Yeah.
I propose adjourning.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
good for me. And I've made it to my destination. I'm just waiting for someone to show up.
Yeah. Next meeting, we'll try the new Zoom link to see if it works. Like I just created a recurring Zoom meeting.
If it does not, I will give a Zoom link, because I have, as I said, paid Zoom until Saturday or Sunday. If yours fails.
I mean, I can always provide a spontaneous Zoom link, but the question is like, does it work automatically even without me?
Okay, good. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah, and we can use mine up this week. It's not that big a deal.
No, but it's good to start testing now.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.